Awesome. Very cool. Cool. I wore my special pants today just for this presentation. Give me all the confidence I need. But yes, I'm Ayres. I'm a partner at HAWRAF, a design and technology studio based here in New York. My other partners are these lovely gentlemen perched precariously upon these stools, Andrew, Nikki, and Pedro. I am the one in the pink skirt. And you may have seen our work in the form of voyeuristic e-commerce websites. We did this one for Los Angeles-based fashion brand Entire World, or perhaps from bringing a few smiles to a few cities out west for a dental startup, including a mirrored poster you can take selfies in. We also did this website for artist Mark Horowitz, which you can actually call a 1833 number, and he'll narrate you through some of his various works. As well as this one for another artist, Taeyoon Choi, who is one of the co-founders of the School for Poetic Computation here in New York, which you can read true to form in a series of variety of these interactive poetic ways, from changing the background and the text and the spacing, et cetera, and so forth. Or maybe you've stumbled upon our website at one point or another, which if you spend a substantial amount of time on it, you can draw all over it, create something just as beautiful as this. You can also draw us an email or play tic-tac-toe with a bot. Or if you love this website, Designer News, you've probably stumbled upon a passionate, vibrant discourse surrounding any of our recent launches. We make a lot of appearances over there. But chances are you probably haven't heard about us at all, as we're still relatively new. We just hit 2 years in September. So in the chance that you haven't heard of a studio called HAWRAF, this is how you pronounce it. It's HAW like saw minus the S plus an H, raft minus the T. Pretty straightforward, should be helpful for all of you. And my career started off as the second employee at Creative Mornings, an international lecture series, before working at a small studio called Figure. I worked for and with a few larger agencies and venture capital companies, as well as wrote about art and design for various editorial publications, all of which eventually landed me at Google in the Creative Lab, which is where I met my other 3 partners, and we decided over wheatgrass shots and the most delicious free lunches that we would just leave all that behind and we'd start a design studio. It's worked out pretty well. But these are some of the companies who have trusted us. This is my logo slide. It's here so you'll trust me too. These are people who've given us money and allowed us to make things for them. Thank you for that. And today we're talking about something that I've spent a fair amount of time thinking about over the last few years, which is this idea of practice. The things that you do over and over and over again in hopes that each time is going to be slightly better than the last. But what is practice anyway? Well, my friend Andrew up here introduced me to Allen Iverson, and now we know it's not a game. No, definitely not a game. But it's the actual application or use of an idea, belief, or method, as opposed to theories about such application or use. So for each of us in starting the studio, we had all these ways of working and thinking that we wanted to try out, ideas, beliefs, methodologies that we wanted to put in action and see what worked. And like any good Google-bred designers, we started with a list in a Google Doc. We started like number 1, always start with concept. That's why concept is number 1. Or don't be an asshole, that's an important one too. As well as never do something just because that's the way it's been done before, to always be honest, to listen. And those were just a few, quite a few, that we wrote when we started the studio. But every year we've checked back in on this list. We've made changes, iterations, to make sure that we're continuing to grow and evolve in all the ways that we want to. This is a more condensed analog version that still exists on Andrew's desk today, along with this half-eaten cookie. People to be open, to listen, make good work, or good money has been a big one this year. And so today, I thought I'd share a few things that we've been practicing, how that informs the studio today, and kind of where we see ourselves going from here. Like to always start with concept. Concept is number 1. This is the last website I made for myself. It is also a Google Doc, clearly still in my Google Doc peak. And for most of my career, I've worked as a writer, using language and interaction to engage people. ideally in a newer, interesting way. And with this website, the idea was to have a place. I wanted a place where I could add updates and notes, out-of-office notices, what have you, with the one caveat that anyone else could also do that, and still can, add little notes, suggestions, feedback. So it's seen quite a few iterations since then, also earning it one of the 10 ugliest websites on the internet. Thank you, Fast Company, for that one. That was very cool. But it hits upon a belief that is very core to a lot of the work we do in the studio, which is this idea that anything can be interactive. So whether it's a Google Doc or a mirrored selfie poster or perhaps a t-shirt, the things you put out into the world should say something, and they should invite someone to say something back. That theory informed one of the last projects we actually did while working in Google's Creative Lab, this application for the Google Creative Lab 5 program. Each year they choose a writer, a designer, a developer, an animator, filmmaker, and a wild card to come and do a series of either self-initiated projects as well as other projects within the Creative Lab. That was it. And then the theory, oops, sorry. A big part of that almost there. In the past, applicants had just been word of mouth, or they had applied via some series of random clicks that eventually led them to this form. But with our concept, we really wanted to invite applicants to make something. We wanted to streamline that process of randomly navigating around the internet to find this and hopefully show off a little bit of their skill set along the way. So aside from legal form and mumbo jumbo that comes with a job application, a big part of this one was the ability to make something. So you'd arrive here and it would look a little bit like the abstracted Google homepage, and then upon a few clicks and pokes, you would notice that all these shapes are vectorized. You can move them, change them. You can use this timeline down here to animate them. You can use that search bar, which is actually a text bar. If you're a writer, you could write a little essay there. And then if you're a developer, you can actually get into the code and unlock various features. And one of the really awesome things is when you give someone a blank space or like a box to think outside of, or say doodle within, the results are really, really awesome. This is only a handful of some of the things people made using this application, but in previous years, they'd only had like a handful of applicants, and shortly after this, they had 8,000 applicants. So it was pretty effective at eliciting a strong response. Something else that we're practicing a lot in this studio is this idea of transparency. We believe that if we can be open and honest about what it's like to start a studio, then hopefully it'll make it a little bit easier for someone else who's also just starting out. We do that through things like showing our P&L at the last conference we spoke at, or sharing out this image of where all our clients come from, which is a very popular question we get. We've also done it by showing the process of developing our own process. We've all read one of these articles. I've certainly read a few of them myself, which talk about the creative secret that most people don't know, or strategies for making magic. And it's this framing and our complicity in it that not only does our entire industry a disservice by selling the work we do as some form of magic, which makes it difficult to advocate and really negotiate for its value, but it continues to perpetuate this false narrative that there is a secret toolkit you need to be a designer. So, in an attempt to demystify that and to also learn a little bit more about live streaming, which we figured out through a myriad of ways, including duct taping an iPad to the ceiling of the new museum, which you can ask me about later. But we decided to respond to 26 briefs over 26 hours, one for every letter of the alphabet. Nikki built this really awesome word generator where you could click a letter and it would pull from dictionary.com a word and a definition, and then we would make something in response to that word. So for us, this was an exercise in trying out a lot of different ways of working together to better understand how we come up with good ideas, as well as to figure out how do each of us work best and how can we work well together as a studio. Each hour we would document the highs and lows so we could do it a little bit better the next time. And we made a lot of friends, like Shelley in Australia, who around 2 a.m. as we were waning in motivation, let us know that they had put this stream up on all the monitors across their campus, which was really just the motivation we needed to finish this creative endurance test. And we made a ton of stuff. We made houses, we made Dink Bar, which is kind of a kind bar, invented new units of measurement and a music video. And we discovered that when you invite people into your process, they tend to get a lot more invested in it, and they care a lot more about the end result, which was something that we had the pleasure of putting into action with some work we did for Brooklyn-based studio CW&T. Now, CW&T, or Sayway and Taylor, are the two larger humans on the right of this photo, and they make the most finely engineered, wonderful objects you have ever seen, like this titanium pen that has one flat edge, so it never does that annoying thing and rolls off the table, or this jump rope designed and built to be the last one you will ever buy, a single-use stopwatch that you can also start from one moment in time and ideally have it run forever, as well as this super sleek minimalist keychain. And behind each of these very highly engineered objects is, no surprise, a lot of engineering. Sayway and Taylor are the only couple I know of, particularly in Brooklyn, who happen to have a CNC machine in their basement. And they put it to good use. Each of these projects has years and years of sketching and prototyping, testing, and manufacturing, all before it's ready to go out into the world, which they typically do via Kickstarter. And when they came to us, they were looking for a way to drive a little bit more traffic towards their projects post-Kickstarter launch, which they thought would be through a shiny new e-commerce website. And see, behind each of these projects, despite spending all this time manufacturing and testing and creating like all these various prototypes, people were only seeing all that stuff when they would launch these Kickstarters. And for us, that process is what makes these objects just absolutely so wonderful. And we really wanted to come up with a way to showcase that. So we ended up developing an identity system that allows them to share more during the beginning of the process. So comprised of this like little colored dot, a serial number, and an author. The result was this nearly infinite labeling system for all of their projects. The serial number and colored dot are generated based on a series of manually chosen inputs at the beginning of a project, as well as the metadata from the initial image and video associated with that project, allowing them to kind of create any image they want, share any type of process, but have it go out into the world using this branded frame that unifies everything coming out of their studio. But a branding system is only as good as it is easy to use and maintain after you're done. So a big part of this project was also developing a tool that would allow them to do that super easily. Starting with this application here that we made, they would choose whether it's a new project or an existing project. If it was an existing project, they would choose whether it's useful or not, hard or soft, quick or long, human or machine, drop the image in, and voila. This is what it looks like actually in action in their Instagram feed. The cool thing about this as well is, other than social media, but that serial code also doubles as a hashtag. So someone who is a super fan can start following along. Maybe they see an initial sketch. They are able to decipher it, figure out what the object is that they're making, as well as get really invested in that project as it moves from initial sketch to final execution, at which point it then can go and live on their website alongside all the process imagery associated with that project. You might remember this one from Andrew's desk, Good Work or Good Money. It's an important one we've been working on this year. And we have a lot of conversations in the studio about what kind of projects we should take on. So in the early days, we would struggle a lot to weigh these pros and cons around whether a project was worthwhile. And we ended up developing this flow chart as a way to better have that conversation internally, as well as help us arrive at a unanimous decision. One of my favorite parts of this is right after, is this something we believe in? We ask ourselves if we're broke. And if we're broke, are we like really broke? And if we are we going to feel okay and be willing to talk about this? And if we aren't, we don't do it. It's really that simple. We believe if we can't afford to keep our doors open while still doing work that we feel comfortable talking openly about, then we probably shouldn't have a studio. We should just all go get jobs somewhere else. I think as designers, we have this habit of spending a lot more time thinking about and designing things than we do actually imagining how they're going to be used by the people who are using them, and testing them and seeing those out in the world. With a lot of our projects, we try to think about how this is going to exist long after we're gone. And like you saw with CWT, the end result tends to be a tool of some sort. Last summer, Super Union, another agency here in New York, approached us for some help on the rebrand they were doing for the Brooklyn Symphony Orchestra. This was the initial mark. And this is where they ended up, pulling from symbolism in Brooklyn and the movement of music and the members of the orchestra themselves. But they wanted to move, so we helped them do that. And we helped them do that in a few ways. So aside from coming up with like the colors and the movements and all that jazz, a big part of this project was helping them build a tool that would allow them to execute this system super easily. So that last video was that in action earlier this season behind the orchestra while they're playing in Brooklyn. And this is what the tool looks like that allows all that to happen. So in my opinion, design tools can be kind of confusing sometimes. There's a lot of hidden buttons and icons, as well as shortcuts that you hit by accident, and then you spend the next 2 hours Googling on the internet trying to figure out how to undo what you just did and you didn't even know you did. So the goal with this was to make this as easy to use as possible, especially for the people who would be using it, which is the members of the orchestra. And so using here, they can either upload an audio file, they can either whistle a little tune, it reacts to that as well, they export a visual, and voila, they can put it on posters and on their website, as well as on tickets. Now, it's been a long year, in case most of you haven't been here, but a big thing we're trying to practice in the studio is showing up. We show up in terms of who we work with, how we spend our money, and what the output of the time we spend is. In January, about 3 to 5 million people participated in women's marches across the US alone, with others participating in other cities around the world. And at the time, we had just begun working with Tia, this personal chatbot that you message with about birth control and sexual health, helping shape all the interactions and the voice and tone for how this thing works. Now, Tia, as a product to be used primarily by women or people with vaginas, sometimes separate categories. But a big part of this was figuring out how to be engaged with this conversation, how to be supportive of the march without coming off as like really icky or tacky, because if they weren't to be part of that conversation, then they're complicit in another narrative altogether, just opting out of being supportive in any capacity. And Carolyn, the co-founder, felt pretty strongly about that as well. So we ended up working with her to come up with a way of being supportive of the marches without coming off as tacky or icky in any way, like some other brands during that time. And where we arrived at was this idea for a poster generator that allowed people to come. They could choose from a series of pre-selected assets. They could choose a slogan, something that resonated with them, or add their own, and then export that to make a poster that they could then print out to either at home or take with them to a march. And the coolest thing about any project like this, of course, is seeing it out in the world. I was in DC, my partner Andrew was in New York, and then we also had just a ton of friends who spotted these out in the crowd and sent us these lovely images. And while showing up has been important, learning how to create space or spaces has been a really healthy exercise for all of us as well. Back in 2015, I had the idea to create a space for freelancers from the creative community to come together to share resources, advice, tips, and help, all within the very cool enterprise software of the moment, Slack. A play on any award given to a certain number under a certain age group, hundreds under 100, was meant to be the antithesis of that. So inclusive and inviting, everyone was welcome, as long as you're under 100 years of age. That's kind of the cutoff. And as a creative community, we had the opportunity of having a lot of awesome people from the community have created these beautiful custom app icons. It started off with just a few channels, show and tell, which is for shameless plugs and self-promotion, intros for introductions, jobs, opportunities, but has since expanded to encompass a whole host of different topics, ranging from bikes and cats to games and the more niche not a surf. And we also have private channels for LGBTQ, women and non-binary identifying people, as well as people of color. They've created a bunch of really awesome documents, also in Google Docs, where they share resources and capture recurring conversations and questions. And we learned a lot, including that any lesson learned when building a community like this tends to be at someone else's expense. But I learned a lot about setting clear expectations, which we do in a few different ways now, including a code of conduct, which was forked from another community and has been edited and added by the admins within our community as well as the members. And we learned that when you prioritize the safety of the most marginalized, you're creating a space that is better for everyone else as well. So when you create rules and set guidelines for how people can engage and act in a space, you're making it easier for everyone by eliminating the unknown, and you're also telling them what's going to happen when things do go wrong and setting guidelines for that. And you create trust through accountability, so we've been practicing holding each other accountable and continuing to listen. Again, when you make a space and you invite other people to fill it with their stories or with doodles or with Google Docs or what have you, you're creating a really great opportunity for some awesome stuff to happen. And we've seen that in play as well with a series of events that we've been hosting through Hundreds Under 100 called Show and Tell, kind of making that IRL. And in it, we have, these are not like your typical portfolio pitch talks. Here, people come and they share hurdles that they've overcome in their professional and personal lives, as well as projects, which I'm sure we all have a few of these, but will never see the light of day, unfortunately, for better or for worse, aside from this 6-minute talk, as well as just how they're using their creative skills and talents to make positive change in the world around them. And while everyone doesn't feel totally comfortable getting up in front of a stage of people, I can't imagine why, we also try to create spaces for them to come in as well. We have a value, and we're practicing asking a lot of questions, so we try to create spaces for other people to ask us questions as well. We get a lot of questions on Instagram, lots and lots of questions on Instagram, but they ended up inspiring a series that we do on the first Friday of every month, where we invite a group of people to come and ask us questions at our studio. And the best part about these, aside from combining 10 coffee conversations into one, is that the attendees are usually the ones with the really, really great insights, quite frequently answering each other's questions, connecting them to opportunities, and just bringing a host of diverse, awesome perspectives to all these conversations. Don't know a lot, but all I know is how little I know. And one of the things we've been trying to practice is sharing what we know in the studio. We had an opportunity to do that earlier this year when the Creative Independent reached out to us and asked us to write one of their in-depth guides for creative humans. We decided to write about working with clients, something we've learned a lot about this over the past few years. And so we wrote a really in-depth guide, everything from how to calculate your value and negotiate your rate, as well as when to walk away or how to seal the deal, including some of my very favorite email templates. So if you like email templates and working with clients, you should go check it out. Maya Angelou said, "Do the best you can until you know better. When you know better, do better." We've been practicing doing a little bit better. This is a political poster. Fast Company commissioned us, as well as a few other designers, to make political posters that best encapsulated our take on the election back in 2016, pre-election. This is what we made. At the time, the narrative looked a little bit like this, quite frequently prioritizing like pokes and clicks and shock value and provocation over any type of meaningful action or narrative. These are the other posters that people made in response to this Fast Company brief from Natasha Jen and her studio and Bobby C. Martin, which don't look like the images on the other slide, and they each bring their own unique perspective to that prompt. But with ours, we really wanted to talk about action and how you could make small change. And even though small change isn't going to fix everything, we believe it's a start, and thought that a poster that encouraged that deserved some space amidst all that conversation. This is what it looked like outside the new museum, and a few people who took pictures of their kids in front of it. I recently read this article by Holly, the founder of Wayno, founder and CEO, and in it he says, the only way we can get better is if we listen to each other's stories, that we create spaces where people can share those stories and we can learn from them. And I think that encapsulates a lot of the things that we've been practicing as a studio. We're big believers that perfection is dumb, nothing is precious, and fuck perfection. But we do believe that with each of these things, and every time we do it, that hopefully we can do it a little bit better than we did last time. These are the things that we're currently practicing. Thank you for letting me share them with you.